Warning: the following episode of That Mental Ginger Show contains strong language and adult themes.
Alright, troops.
Hello and welcome to That Mental Ginger Show with your host Andrew Durning, aka The Mental Ginger. Well, my 7 faithful followers, we just keep the podcast guests coming, and I'm very, very honoured to have this guest on because he's actually interviewed somebody from one of my favourite bands, which is Nickelback. He is an actor, he is a director, a singer, and also the host of the podcast The Fittest Fat Kid You Know, Bruce Nachsin. Bruce, how are you, my friend? And did I get your last name right?
My God, you did. So that's a gold star for you.
I'm breaking the streak. I was on a really bad streak of pronouncing everybody's last names really, really badly, and I'm now starting to break the streak. So thank you, Bruce. You're already one of my favorite guests because I got your last name right.
This is the kind of luck that I bring people. So
yeah, it's the kind of joy
7 people. You
yes.
you can partake of the kind of help I bring you.
Yes, and you're certainly going to bring that because we're going to talk about your origin story. Because if there's one thing we all have in common, is that we all have an origins. So, Bruce, for my 7 faithful followers, please tell us your origin story.
Well, I was a very kind of picked on fat child. So I was very shy, very, very smart, but very, very cloistered. My mother was a very lovely, caring, and most importantly, supportive woman. However, she was also to some degree paranoid. So I wasn't allowed to touch dirt until I was 7 years old. If I showed any kind of normal kid behavior, the very first thing she would do is take me to some kind of child psychologist, whom I don't have a lot of faith in because of my experiences. So because I was imaginative, I liked things like Star Wars from a very early age.
Speaking my language already, Bruce.
Oh yeah, I know you're a nerd. I am.
I'm proud.
First off, did you see? Did you see?
Of course.
Can you see?
Of course, I can see. I can
Gundam
see.
magazines, and that's stuff I've done in the past year. I've not grown up.
Yep. So for anybody that's listening on Spotify, please clarify what it is you've just pointed to, because obviously I have Spotify and they don't have the video for it yet.
So what I have behind me is my wall of nerdosity. This is something that I've put there as a background for when I do my own show. Back when I had my short film Dark Spectre 2 going and I was being interviewed, this was the background for it. Of course, it's in sort of like a little bit of a light haze because the camera I'm using has a very narrow depth of field because it's not just a webcam. It's my Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro.
Yeah. Ooh,
Thank
very
you.
nice. Very nice. I am a £15 Amazon webcam.
There you go.
That is me. I did upgrade the tech. I got the new mic, new headset. What in particular for all these new and more experienced podcasting guests that I was having on, like yourself. So tell me about the experiences when you were growing up. Because you sound very much like I was when I was a kid. I was quite shy. I was quite introverted. Picked on quite a lot, and so I can really relate to that type of thing. We never were able to afford child psychologists. That's why I'm doing the Mental Ginger Show, because it's like my free therapy. So how did you find going to a child psychologist? Because I've been to therapy as an adult, but never as a child.
I don't have a lot of deep recollections of it. They mainly drugged the crap out of me.
Wow. Was it that, is it Ritalin that's in the US?
No. Ritalin wasn't in the US.
Oh, you're in Canada anyway, so you wouldn't get Ritalin, would you?
Well, no, I'm not in Canada. I'm in Los Angeles and I was born in Philadelphia.
Oh, there we go.
So even though I'm not a sports person, I do relate to having violent, horrific loyalty to a sports team. I don't follow them, but American football, for me, it's the Eagles because that's how I identify with my hometown. A hometown that I really don't want to return to for the most part, unless I desperately need Chinese food, American Chinese food, but they don't really have it the way I like it on the West Coast. So I'm one of those weird people where it's sort of like pizza, not here. You're in Scotland, right?
I am indeed, yes. I'm a Scottish boy. Well, I do follow American football as well. My team is the Washington football team. Well, I did support them when they were still the Redskins. So the rare memorabilia that I've got now could be worth a fortune on eBay in years to come. That will be going to my kids when I grow up.
Maybe to your kids, or just maybe do something really good, cool for yourself later on. Just because you have kids, don't neglect yourself.
Oh,
I believe you.
I've got a ton of. I'm a massive Thomas the Tank Engine fan. Well, so I've got tons of like Thomas memorabilia that is guaranteed to be worth a truckload of money, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna keep sitting on this and just waiting the right moment, then boom. But because it's funny when the boys see it, they go, "Oh, play with Daddy's toys." I'm like, "These toys stay in the box, little guys. You go near them, and your inheritance is cut off."
Let's sit down and talk to Daddy a moment. Daddy doesn't play with toys. He's what is known as a collector.
Yes.
These are not toys. These are future investments.
Yes, these are called collectibles. They do not leave the packaging unless.
And then your kids look at you.
Then they look at me like I should be going back to therapy.
Right.
So I'm now getting like a free therapy session off of you, Bruce.
I can have that effect on people.
Yeah, you have a very.
But back to me, because I'm also slightly. But no, please. You're going to say kind things about me, and I want to hear.
Well, you have a very calming voice. You do have a voice that is very well suited for the podcasting game, and acting as well. So, what got you into acting? Was it as a child, or was it closer to your teenage years? Enlighten.
Well, the acting came later. And by the way, I do want to clarify something. I am not a singer. You do not want to hear my singing voice. Small animals plunged from trees at the sound of my lyrical intonations. So
I sincerely apologize to the singing inadequacies. But you are
like a stab to the heart.
You are a writer director as well, correct?
Yes.
Well, there we go.
Yes,
I've redeemed myself slightly.
I have written several short films. I have produced numerous short films. I've produced a couple films for other people.
Wow.
I've written several. I've acted in them because mostly it was the trying to get out all that pent up energy that if you were to do it in the middle of a mall, you'd get arrested. So acting provides a nice valve for that. The question is, do we want to leave the childhood stuff to go into this now? Or do we want to circle back to the childhood stuff? Why am I doing these weird hand gestures? I'm very much like a
I don't mind the hand gestures though. Like they help guide me. So what we'll do is we will circle back to the childhood stuff because it will link into probably the acting stuff, and then we can get a flow through. So we'll
in a roundabout way, it does.
In a roundabout way?
Yes. So back to the childhood and the medication. So I was very imaginative, and this panicked my mother because I was always talking about aliens and space and starships and dragons because I also saw Excalibur, and that lit me on fire.
Not
so my
literally.
mom took me not literally. I've never actually been lit on fire. I have burned my hand cooking several times.
Yeah. We're just clarifying that it's not like an Undertaker Kane scenario.
No.
Go.
Nor the Bray Wyatt thing that happened.
There we go.
He never came back from. It just got released later on. Just so you know, because I know you're a big wrestling fan. I'm an old school wrestling fan.
Yes.
I haven't really watched in a long time, but my history of wrestling was the old Jim Crockett promotions, that Southern style WCCW, the Von Erichs. That was all over TV when I was going to school. Brilliant. So that's what I gravitated to. And the WWF at the time was like a cartoon. And despite the fact that I was not only a pacifistic child, but a coward, you wouldn't think that extreme violence would have been what lit my ass on fire, figuratively.
Yeah.
But it was.
Yeah.
So even though I kind of...
I think it is something that we kind of relate with that because for me, like the Attitude Era and stuff was where I gravitated to, and nobody thought that I would like it. But I think it's because you can't physically beat the crap out of someone, so you live vicariously through the guys that are doing it for you.
Yes.
So I've got to ask, who was your favorite wrestler?
Who was my favorite wrestler?
Ooh.
When I was a kid, it was Magnum TA.
Oh,
and the
interesting choice. Very interesting choice.
I liked the baby faces because for whatever reason, I'm psychologically connected to virtuous heroes. Even though when you actually look at the stuff that I've made on film, none of it's like that. I'm always the villain.
Mm.
So my short film, Dark Spectre and Dark Spectre 2. Dark Spectre is a comedy skit, but Dark Spectre 2 is about a very powerful supervillain who's sort of shackled to the fact that he has to take care of his ailing mother.
Mm.
So all of the stuff I write tends to be this dark anti-hero stuff. But whenever I used to play role-playing games, I was always the lawful paladin. I was always something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And with the wrestling, it was the same thing. So the person I hated the most. And actually, since wrestling has its own way of fandom, probably the person who I was the biggest fan of because I hated him the most and really wanted to see him hurt was Jim Cornette.
Aha.
And in fact, I listened to his podcasts.
Yes, I do listen to his podcast as well. I've got back into the Grilling JR podcast as well. I also like WrestleMania for the YouTube top tens.
I do watch WrestleMania. It's funny. I watch that stuff far more than any wrestling. The only wrestling I've seen recently is some of the AEW CM Punk stuff because that stuff reads to me like wrestling the way I like it. That's how I like it. I believe Punk. I don't care whether he's currently kayfabing or if it's legitimate. You can't tell the difference. He is an artist in what he does. So I can watch him.
Yep, it's very old school kayfabe through CM Punk. And I think we're at that kind of point where we like the behind the scenes stuff because they always talk about the stuff that we watched when we were growing up, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that happened. Like I like Dark Side of the Ring, and I just watched the Plane Ride from Hell. I was like, wow, that happened when I was watching that London pay-per-view. I remember watching that pay-per-view before all that happened. It's crazy. Anyway, well, enough about me and my weirdness. We're here to talk about you
and my weirdness.
Exactly.
So we were talking kids. Imagine. So we're still on they took me to a child psychiatrist. Not 100% sure. It has to have been a psychiatrist.
I think it's a psychiatrist because they are the medical ones, so they can provide the pills.
So the psychiatrist told my mother, and I know this wasn't the case for me, but he told my mother that if she didn't do something rapidly, I would slip from reality and not be able to tell the difference.
What?
I knew the difference between the fantasy world that I was playing in versus reality. But instead, they drugged me. And I'm not 100% sure. I think what they put me on was Thorazone.
Wow.
Which, it was that or lithium. But either way, it did a couple things to me. It slowed me down completely. So it destroyed my metabolism while increasing my hunger about 5-fold. So I went from being and this happened, I think, around 4 or 5. So my metabolism was shut down. I began eating a lot. I began gaining weight as a kid. So it was kind of, at that point, I wasn't a shy, awkward kid, but I got fat. We moved from where I originally lived to a new place. And at the new place, I began getting bullied. So I was getting beat up on a bi-weekly basis. And I began to get really, really shy. Plus, I was heavy, and life is not kind to heavy children.
It's not kind to heavy people in general.
No, it's not.
I cannot believe that they put you on drugs just because you had an imagination. I remember being at primary school and imagining that the wall on one of our staircases was like a Star Trek Next Generation. It was like one of those pads in the wall that you would press the buttons and try and figure out where all the spaceships and stuff were and all that. I would do that on my own in primary school, just with that wall, and I was so content and so happy. If my mum and dad found out about that, I probably would have been committed. Or if your parents had found out, they would have brought me over, had me committed with you.
Yeah, of course.
Wow, I'm really sorry that you had to go through that, man.
Thank you. Being heavy in the bullying, the other thing that happened is I'm ethnically Jewish. I don't really have much in the way of a faith. I don't have much in the way of a belief. I believe that you have to interact with the world on your own level. I don't want to get too much into faith because I don't talk about it too much and I don't care about it.
Hmm.
But what happened is I was of Jewish faith moving into an area that was highly Irish Catholic.
Ah, right. I got you.
And the adults in this area also treated me horribly. I had a neighbor who my mom befriended mostly to keep an eye on her because she was effectively very dangerous. She was a gossip. She was known to occasionally get people hurt.
Wow.
She was just this nasty, evil person. I'm not going to
Nice.
say her last name, but we can call her P. So P used to have like a circle of people around her, one of which was this young lady who was her toady. And what they would do, she had 2 kids as well, but they would compare me to her son. Let's call him Sam. Sam was...
It's a good name. Son of Sam. There we are.
Yeah. Sam was just like your average, not too smart, not too stupid guy, but he would pick on me and I didn't fight back. And they would make him feel better and raise him up by comparing that, like, he's so much better looking than me, he's so much thinner than me. And this is what the adults in this area were doing. And this went on up until my teenage years.
Jeez. My God, man.
So one of the things with my podcast, which was called The Fittest Fat Kid You Know, there's a reason I'm the fittest fat kid. By 11 years old, I weighed 280 pounds. I've gone up and down on my weight, but no matter what, as you know, I'm sure you know this, most of the stuff you deal with in the back of your head probably stems from your childhood. Most of the scars you have are the scars of your childhood. When something traumatic happens later in life, it doesn't mean it doesn't scar you, but you have a better tool set to deal with it. So something that hit you at 11 years old stays with you. It's hard to dig that out of the psyche versus something happened to you 4 years ago and you might have to deal with the ramifications, but you have a chance to clear it out of the processes. I am, no matter how much I weigh, no matter how many friends I have, no matter what's going on in my life, I am perpetually, I will always be, I will die in a 280-pound 11-year-old. That is the pilot behind these eyes. And that's the nature of what my upbringing did to me.
What about your dad? Where was your dad through all this?
He died at age 8.
Jesus, man. You had that to go through as well?
Yes. And that devastated me. Me and my father were incredibly close. This psychologist or somebody once told my mother that if one of us were to pass on, the other would follow shortly after. My father, so my 8th birthday was the highlight of my birthday life. I am not fond of birthdays. One, I don't relate to getting older. I see people do this weird kind of slowdown in their mentality. And it's not that aging doesn't affect you, it does. But I think the idea of aging tends to affect people more than the actual aging. I have a friend who keeps talking about the fact that he's now 52 and this is the last of this and he doesn't have the time or the energy for this. And it's not that well, in fairness to him, he also had meningitis and that took a piece of his life force with him. We used to go walking together, we would exercise, and he had a lot of energy. And then I went to visit him several years after the meningitis, and I walked him into the ground within 45 minutes. And he had to go home, and it was just sad. So in his case, there's fairness to the way he feels that way.
Yeah.
But I don't feel any different mentally now than I did when I was 20 or 30. So it's very much a mindset kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also, somebody on my 21st birthday literally died in front of me, just had a heart attack and there he went. And so from my 21st birthday, not been fond of celebrating birthdays. It's just
understandable. Well, you should also have that in the back of your head that someone's going to drop dead in front of you.
Right. That does stay.
Yeah, definitely. I remember the first time that I saw someone pass away. I was working for the National Health Service, and I was at the front desk. The guy was saying that his chest was a bit sore, and then as I was putting stuff through, he just dropped in front of me and died. And I was it only took me like a couple of days to get through it because I was just like, well, I didn't know the guy, blah blah blah. But it's still something. It sticks with you, man. Especially on your 21st. Happy milestone, dude.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
But back to that 8th birthday,
Mm-hmm.
all of my friends from school were invited over. It was at my favorite pizza place. I got a ton of Lego. Lego is a toy that I still love, but now I'm looking at kits that are $800 going, my
Mm.
girlfriend would kill me. And I
Yeah,
have no place to put that thing in the house, so I
yeah.
can't buy that.
My brother used to have like a massive tub of Lego, and it was before he could do all the proper builds. So he scratch built an entire replica DS9, Star Trek DS9 space station in our loft. And I looked at it and I was like, Daniel, you've done brilliantly, but how are you going to get out of here because you boxed yourself into a corner? So he's like, oh no, I'm going to have to take this all down. I was like, or you can just stay up there. I don't mind. Bye.
We'll bring you food.
Yeah, well, occasionally. But yeah, so
So
your 8th birthday, you got the Legos.
it
You
was
had pizza party. You had your friends there.
it was the highlight of my life up to that point. It was the best party I ever had. They made a cake with like the little space Lego people on it. It was wonderful.
No.
A couple months later, my dad has a stroke. Now, my dad always had heart issues.
Yeah.
There's two sides to my family. There's my mother's side, and provided there's not an external force on them, they're immortal, effectively. They live into their 90s, into their hundreds.
Mm,
They're going to they're going to outlast stone.
mm.
On my father's side, they drop like flies. They get into their 40s and 50s and they die.
Same with my family. It's like my mom's side are 80s, 90s. My dad's side, it's a question mark. But my dad's 16, he's still here, so Dad, just don't drop dead on me yet. Love you. But anyway,
Dad stay.
that is a little bit insensitive to you, so I apologise. But
No, it's not. Absolutely.
back
It's
to
not
your
insensitive at all.
yeah, back to your story. So your dad had just had a stroke.
So, and actually, let me tell a little, because this is also psychologically scarring. So, the night my dad had his stroke, previously he had a heart attack. And when he had his heart attack, I was able to go to the hospital to see him. I could interact with him. The night of his stroke, my dad worked at a pool hall that was very close to where we lived. We had this apartment in this place called Bluegrass Road
Hmm.
in Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia. And then there was the Northeast Mall, and there was a pool hall there.
Hmm.
And my dad, who was never literate, my dad never learned to read or write. He was a bit of a hustler type guy. He worked at this, and he was good at pool, so he'd hustle pool for money. He also worked managing this pool hall. In the pool hall, there was a video game. I would go there and I would play games. On this particular night, I'd gone there. I was trying to play the games. My dad was trying to get rid of me. And like any kind of bratty kid, not any kind of bratty kid, but like a lot of bratty kids, we had an argument. And I said to him, I hope you die. And then I left in tears because I was really upset.
Wow.
He didn't come home that night. I was aware he didn't come home that night. Then the next morning, he wasn't there. And nobody was telling me where he was. So I assumed because of our fight, he didn't come home. Then they told me he's in the hospital. He had another issue, but I can't go and see him. So now the last thing I said to my dad is, I wish you were dead. He's in the hospital. And it's the start of summer. So they pack me up. And for the first time in my life, they send me to an overnight camp, which I was not psychologically geared towards. So now my dad's at the hospital. I can't go see him. They've shipped me 50 miles away from home. I'm now in the woods, not a natural location for me to be in.
Mm.
Having some fun. Archery was fun. Shooting the little 22 rifles were fun. Feeling awkward about swimming because I was chubby and didn't like to be seen without my shirt on. But it was a nice summer camp. And the reason I was there is that a cousin of a cousin was a counselor there. So there was somebody to watch over me.
Right.
Finally, I don't know how long later, because of course, in my mind's eye, it was like 5 years, but in reality, it probably was 2-3 weeks. A car comes to pick me up. It's a couple relatives, but not relatives I really knew. They have toys for me, and they're very kind. And off we go. So I'm going home. Of course, in my child mind, my dad's okay. I can finally get to see him because nobody told me otherwise. I'm playing with the toys, a little puzzle. I think one was a Rubik's Cube. We get home. My mom takes me into the bedroom and she sits me down and she tells me my father has died. It doesn't register. She's in tears. I'm just sitting there. Because, of course, the Jewish tradition, he had died, I think, the night before. They immediately had come and got him. So the next day was the funeral. I had no reaction through the funeral. I remember his body in the box. I went up, and he didn't look like himself. He never looked like that. I don't think at 8 years old I could quantify it as being made up for a silent movie, but that's kind of what the makeup looked like.
Was it so it was an open casket then?
Yes, I could see him.
Yeah.
And
We've had that as well on my granddad's, my dad's side, and when my granddad and my granny died, and they're done up to kind of look like they're sleeping. It's like you think you're just waiting for them to go, haha, got you, but at the same time, it's like you said, they don't look like themselves in any other way.
It didn't look like him. I reached up and I touched his lip. And when I did, I could see the stitches. I could see that his lips were sewn shut. At which point I retreated. It didn't really hit me until the funeral happened. And when they're doing a funeral, the casket is on this sort of this belt system that holds it above the plot. And so his casket was there. Had the service was brought to the car was driving away. When I turned around, the box was gone. And that's when I started screaming.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, man.
It's from there, I really began retreating into myself. I tried to be. I don't have it's hard to have a lot of recollections from this time.
Yeah.
I got through grammar school. I won an award because of, I don't even remember what it was, but it was the only cash award they gave. And I was one of 2 people that gave a speech. I did that. Went to in I don't know how it works in the United Kingdom, but here it tends to be grammar school, which you might consider primary school. Then there's usually, certainly for me, it was junior high, and then high school. So I went from grammar school to junior high. I had been considered learning disabled because I have difficulty interpreting vowels,
right?
But otherwise I wasn't. They put me, so I went from classes that were 8 to 10 kids into classes that were now 40. I didn't know how to deal with that. And then to make it worse, the middle school that I went to was a place called Thomas Holmes. And this place was designed weirdly in the 70s, where they had this strange idea that wouldn't it be conducive to education if instead of we have rooms with walls so that each class is isolated, we just have a massive ass wing that is then all the classes are mixed together and only divided by like little barriers.
Yeah.
So
we had that in our high school, but it was only the art department that had that, and it was the same kind of deal. It was just little barriers, but like 4 or 5 classes all along this one stretch of hall.
Right, and it's terrible. It is absolutely distracting and unconducive to education, because you're trying to learn history, or in your case, you're trying to learn perspective and sketching, and yet, meanwhile, over here, there's 3D modeling going on, and you can hear that class. Plus, you can hear the class about proportions and anatomy over here. It's hard to focus on what your teacher, who's not that great a teacher to begin with, is teaching, because they're friggin' mumbling. It's I don't know where this idea in education came from, but that person clearly had their head up their derriere.
Don't worry, you can say ass. I'll put a swear warning up. It's fine.
I try to tailor my language, considering that I'm from Philadelphia, and in my normal speech, I curse like a sailor.
Well, you're fit in Scotland. I once submitted a play, and the positive feedback I got was one of the most creative users of foul language I've ever written. And I was like, "Fuck yeah, that's nice."
All right. But because I want my podcast to be safe for work,
Of course.
My philosophy with cursing on any kind of media, it goes like this. People who like cursing, and they don't mind if you curse. They also don't mind if you don't curse. Meanwhile, if a part of your audience doesn't like cursing, it completely shuts them down and turns them off.
Mm-hmm.
So since I don't need to be saying fuck all the time, I generally tend to admit it when I'm on camera. It doesn't change who I am. It just means I'm not cursing all the time.
No. I just find that, see, when I'm not, it's like I don't curse around my kids. Well, I'm definitely not saying that, like, or or like my mom and dad or anything like that. I keep as respectful as I can. But sometimes, like, when I'm doing, let's say, like, interviews and stuff, well, if a swear word doesn't creep out every now and then, I don't feel like I'm being authentic to who I am as a person. And so, like, when I watch, like, the earlier episodes of my show, you can see I'm finding my feet and very respectful. I'm trying to keep myself going. But then the later ones, because I'm feeling more comfortable in my presenting style and feel more comfortable with my guests, and then if you're okay with the swearing, I'm like, okay, I can just relax. And swearing can also be a little bit of a nervous tick for me, because you always find that if someone says fuck, they're more likely to laugh.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're trying to be a bit of a joker or a bit of a comedian, sometimes that works. But again, it's all about perspective and all about the audience. So
there was one little moment that kind of really turned me off in these presentations. Cursing is, I did improv around Los Angeles with my improv team, which was called Bizarre Love Triangle. And we'd go to this place called the Clubhouse, which was off of Vermont and Sunset. And there was tons of improv going on there all the time. Yeah. And generally speaking, most people confused saying fuck with being funny. And I rarely did it unless somebody pissed me off, at which point I would do a entire presentation where I did almost nothing but curse to sort of make a point. Now, I could do it and be funny, but I'd watch people and they would struggle and they would curse because it was their bridge to try to bring humor. For me, it didn't work. So I've probably cursed more on your show than I've done in any kind of public forum in a while, simply because why not?
For breaking you, I sincerely apologize. But yeah, that's a good analogy as well, a good perspective. Like, because you're naturally witty, and you've got, and you're very articulate, you don't need to swear, because you've got lots of experience and wisdom and clearly a good handle of yourself to know you don't need to swear. Whereas guys like me are more reserved and edgy about how they come across. So if they just go, oh fuck, more people are going to go, oh well, he's just learning.
Just being himself.
He's just being his own wacky ginger person. Hey.
I also, one of the keys to effectively communicating with somebody is figuring out how they talk and gear yourself towards that. So if you're talking to your doctor, you don't want to be there going like, yeah, so this fucking thing in my lungs just really is just I can fucking feel it cranking on my heart. Like, I don't know, like, am I having a fucking heart attack? Like you're the prick who knows these things. So you wouldn't do that to your doctor.
No.
Nor would you want to be sitting around your mom going like, hey mom, how the fuck you doing this morning? It's
yeah, I know that.
So my mom, you would, because my mom cursed like you wouldn't believe. What was weird is she didn't do it earlier in our lives, but then at some point she just turned it on, and I couldn't be out in a restaurant without being like, Mom, there are children at that table. They can, like, we don't want to teach the 3-year-old how to say dickwad. That's the choice their parents need to make.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I definitely, since becoming a dad, I've really reined in the swearing, and I don't like to swear around my kids. I don't believe in swearing around my kids. But with my wife, if she's frustrated, it does come out. But she grew up on a farm. She was used to that type of language. I remember first meeting her, and she was talking to her auntie, and she'd be going, "Oh, for fuck's sake, auntie!" I'd be like, "Whoa, bit more respect, hen." And she's like, "What?" Well, she couldn't believe it. But so we make the jokes that if the boys ever pick up a swear word, that it's come from the mother. But everybody
one day I can just imagine one day your kid's coming up to you and going, "Dad, are you a motherfucker?"
And I just go, yes, I am.
Yes. But I can just imagine having to navigate that.
Oh, there's going to be so many talks I'm going to have to navigate, especially when it gets to the birds and the bees, because Alison's already said, you have the parts, I don't. That's a talk to your dad scenario. But I never had that talk. I mean, how did that work for you specifically? Because I mean, your dad was gone when you got to that age, and it was that kind of, birds and bees, stuff like that. Did you go to your mum with any questions? Like, did you, or was there like, did you just go to another male, like a male relative? Like, this is the kind of inappropriate stuff that I ask. So,
No,
I'm stepping on toes. Just tell me, Andrew.
Look, I'm basically an open book about such things, especially considering what I'm trying to do on my podcast. It's incumbent upon me to be open and honest about such things. So the first thing about this is my mom had that off on the pass. So early on, one of the earliest books I had was this book that I think was made in the late 60s, which had paper cutouts. It wasn't a pop-up book, but
I was about to say, I was like, just you open it going, hello.
Yeah.
Why is mine not that size?
Right. And I did wonder about that. So the first thing, the book talked about how babies are made. Oh. And what it did is it started first by talking about how flowers get pollinated.
Oh.
Then
intriguing analogy.
How it happens with a chicken. And how it happens with a dog. And it had, oh, pardon me, that's water returning to say hello to the world. Please edit that out. That's embarrassing. So,
don't worry. I don't edit anything because I'm just like, you know what? Life isn't edited. But I can save your just by doing an Austin Powers impression of it going, pardon me to say, pardon me for being so rude. It was not me. It was my food. It just popped up to say hello and now it's gone back down below. So now I look like the dick and you're saved. You're welcome.
Perfect. So back to these illustrations. So they had paper cutout illustrations, including for like the dog and the chicken, when the fertilization was going on, they had cutouts with cross sections. And then it talked about the mommy and the daddy. And because it showed you the dog and it showed you the chicken, it didn't really show you in explicit detail the humans, but it showed them kissing under covers. And then it showed like the belly. So from age 2 or 3, I knew how it worked.
Wow.
So with the time of the birds and the bees, I didn't have those questions because that was handled and normalized when I was 2. And then I became a problem for other parents because if the topic came up around kids, I knew the answer. And I certainly didn't know that I shouldn't tell anybody. So a stork, no. No, like I knew the answers. I didn't quite have all the full language to lay it out. But so that's how the birds and the bees happened. But there was
when it came to me, what we had the high school. There was so the 13, 14 years, so about that was second year. They give you they show you the videos. Oh boy, did they show you the videos! I was almost sick at one point, and I remember coming home. My dad was in. It was one of the rare times he got away from his work early. I came in. He was like, "Oh, how was school?" And I said, "Dad, I've just had sex education. I don't have any questions. I'm not making this uncomfortable. You're off the hook." And off I went. Whereas my brother had the infinite pearl of wisdom from my dad, which was, if you get a girl pregnant, I'm chopping it off. And I thought, classy.
Yes, that lays out everything you need to know in one sentence.
And my dad is listening to this, I am sure. So I am really sorry, Dad. I love you, really. But anyway, so
probably the problem wasn't so much the birds and the bees. I didn't know. What I didn't have was anyone that asked questions, because suddenly I'm 11, 12 hits and I hit puberty in 11. So, and I also was a little bit more curious about the opposite sex early on. So I would see on TV big boobed women and it would strike something in me. And also I found a porno tape at the house that I've done my best to have no curiosity about why it's there, why my mom was watching, or anything like that, because I can't handle those scars even at this age.
I'll tell you an embarrassing story about me and a porno tape in a little bit, but we'll just focus on how how you navigated the waters without, having a male figure in your
Right.
life.
So in fact, this tape is probably where it's cemented several of my primary attractions, which was hourglass shape, big boobs, and redheaded women, because of some of the people who were on this tape.
Mm.
But I didn't. So I knew that there was this thing. I knew I was having attraction to girls, but I didn't know how to talk to them. I didn't know how to approach them. I was getting increasingly more shy. I was getting increasingly more fat. I was in middle school, and for the first year in middle school, which for me was grade 6, I was doing reasonably okay. I wasn't that heavy yet. I was still heavy, but I wasn't that heavy.
Mm.
I was part of what would be considered the geek set, but I was the person who sort of also could talk into the normal people, and I helped a couple.
So you were
people
kind of like
there.
the middleman.
I was the middleman. One of the people who was my geek friend, who was always nearly getting killed because people didn't really like him, was this kid named Ken. From
Sorry,
6th
Ken.
to 7th grade, Ken decided he was going to get popular by picking on me. Not only that, but his mother, who for whatever reason, I don't know how this happened or why, this happened shortly after we'd been over their house. His mother met my mother, and it looked like they were going to have a friendship. Then suddenly I began getting crank calls shortly after that. And then Ken was accusing me of crank calling them. Even though nobody had caller ID at this point, he'd have no reason to think it was me.
Yeah.
I was crank calling him. His mother called me up and said things like, "You filthy Jew, Hitler had the right idea."
Whoa.
Prompting my mother to call her up and threaten to slit her throat, which my mother would have done. And the woman was sort of like, I just was punishing Bruce because, and my mom was like, "Who the fuck are you to punish my kid? Don't ever call my house again because I know where you live, and don't think I won't actually kill you."
Good.
So, but meanwhile, back at middle school, his mother called the disciplinarian there and told the disciplinarian that I'd made a death threat against her son. So the disciplinarian called me to his office, and I was threatened with expulsion if I touched this kid. Meanwhile, he's Zig Heiling me in the hallways. He's trying to beat me up. I cannot defend myself. And when I asked the disciplinarian what I was supposed to do, he told me, just smile at them. Just smile at them. They'll eventually lose interest. Showing how absolutely, positively, his name was Mr. Marcus. And I know I don't talk, but I really want to say this. Fuck you, Mr. Marcus. You piece of shit. You should never have been allowed to be put in an authority position on top of kids because you truly didn't know what the hell you were doing. And you created more problems for more kids than anybody ever should have been allowed to do. Fuck you. God, that felt good.
Good. And I'm glad that you felt comfortable enough to say that on my show.
And so I was now bullied. I was picked on in the school. So I began cutting classes and doing things like making myself look like I was beat up so I had an excuse why I didn't go to school. Eventually, according to my mother, and I have no recollection of this, partway through 7th grade, one day I was forced into school. Apparently, I beat the crap out of Kenny in a hallway, just beat him as much as I could, walked out of school and never went back. And that was the end of my education until I got my GED.
Do you think the reason you can't remember it is because what you are like more of a shy kind of introverted person, so it's like your mind can't cope with that side of you? Because I've had basically a similar thing. A guy bullied me for basically throughout my whole second year of high school, and I remember we were in art class and he was pushing me, so I grabbed his art and I ripped it up in front of his face, and he grabbed my neck, and I couldn't remember anything after that. The next thing I remember was that he was on the deck. The entire class was circled round me, terrified, and I was holding the chair above my head. And basically, what I had done was after he grabbed my neck, it was like a froze. He thought, "Oh, he's not going to do anything." I grabbed the chair, and this is according to my friends, and just beat him mercilessly with this chair. The teacher tried to take it off me. I tried to throw it at her as well. And I was just like swearing and cursing, and it was all just firing out at me. And I couldn't believe it. And I still kind of couldn't, but it seemed to be that thing. If somebody went for my neck, it was like my trigger. Well, and it was that kind of white rage thing, and I couldn't remember. And anything that happens after that, I genuinely don't remember it. So do you think it is because we've got that more kind of, we'll say, beta personality, that when we do something alpha, our brains can't process the fact that we've done something like that?
I don't know, because I'm not sure that I have necessarily a beta personality, because later on, I very much am the person who starts things and gets things done. I think, I'm not sure what it was for me at the time. I don't even know that this really happened.
And I'm not saying that you are like a total beta person, like, because the stuff that you do with your podcasts and your directing and stuff, that does require an alpha personality to get the job done. Well, but maybe it's just from those kind of aspects, like the physical kind of sides of like confrontation and stuff. It's a bit more beta because you like to use your words rather than your actions, like, to defuse the situation. Because I'm the same. I'm kind of the same. Like when I do directing and stuff, I'm more alpha because I know I'm good at this. I know what I'm doing. Let's get this done. But when it comes to what confrontations, I am beta, and I'm like, I would rather solve this with words than violence. So if I do go down the violent route, my brain can't process it.
I talk about, I think maybe back then, possibly now, because back then, one of the things I think about back then is I wasn't the person I was supposed to be because of the doctors, the medicine, the being bullied with and having my arm metaphorically tied behind my back and basically having to accept it. Another time in this middle school, so I'm being Sieg Heiled. There was a counselor who was supposed to help me, and she meant to, and we were talking. And one time we're walking through this vast lunchroom in front of everybody I know and all this bullying going on, and she sees a penny on the floor, and she tells me to pick up the penny. And I don't want to pick up the penny. A penny had, even when I was in middle school, the penny didn't really have value. Yeah. But she made me, a Jew, pick up a penny and pocket it in front of all of these kids, and that helped the bullying very much. So I'm not sure if my mother just maybe misrepresented, because prior to us becoming this enemies, we had a fight once where we had a fight and we reconciled, and we both were suspended for 3 days. This kid, Ken. But yeah, I don't know.
Fuck you, Ken. Fuck you.
Yeah. I remember years later, I decided to go looking for him, and I went to his house, and his life had really collapsed, and that was, to some degree, unfortunately, satisfying to me. I would like to think that I'm better than that, but you're not always better than that. And in that instance,
everybody's got that. But the guy that I told you about that hit with the chair, he's back in prison, and I'm just like, well, I shouldn't feel superior to that in that way, but what you do, it's just a human nature. What sometimes you just think, haha, you did that to me in high school, and now you're in jail.
So for me, what ended up happening is sometime around 12 or 13, and I remember this, I got really tired of being bullied and picked on and all the things that happened. So I decided, whether I won or I lost, I was going to fight every kid in the neighborhood. And I went from kid to kid, not in one day, though I did a bunch in one day. And I had fights with them. And I won about half of them, lost about, it was 50-50. From that point on, I was never bullied again.
Wow.
So, and what I think that is that I just proved that I was going to be too much trouble if you tried to bully me. There was one kid who was on vacation, so I missed him. And then later on, he decided to have a fight with me. And because I wasn't trained, because I didn't have skill, I just was like a vicious bastard in doing it. So we were fighting right outside the apartment I lived in, and they went and got my mom, who really didn't like this kid as well because he was a prick. And one of the kids brought her out, and she just stood there and watched it. And we're like, "Are you going to stop?" And she's like, "No, I'm sure he did something to deserve this." So that was the last, and that actually was probably the last fight I had, an actual fight I've had in my life.
Wow.
Where it was physical. So that was 13. So
So
it was productive.
So to relate it back to the wrestling, you essentially committed a battle royale,
Mm-hmm.
went round, beat the crap out of people, as well as getting.
It was more like I think it'd be more like a Survivor Series because it wasn't all at one time,
Mm.
and there were no ropes to throw people over.
But in fairness, I'm pretty sure you probably would have got like a few finishing moves on them. So I have every faith.
Figure 4 leg lock was my favorite. I was good at that one too.
Well,
Because we used to wrestle in junior high before I left it.
Yeah, I liked the. This is for my era. It was the Walls of Jericho because Chris Jericho was my favorite wrestler. Well, and I remember putting
effectively the sharpshooter.
Yeah, I remember putting my brother in it. And then I dropped his legs, but I dropped them right on our coffee table. I didn't realize the coffee table was there. Well, and he's screaming. He's like, "I think you broke my shins," and I'm like, "Sorry." That's that. But in fairness, you did rock bottom, stunner, and angle slam me. No one's perfect.
Yeah.
So we're moving away, hopefully, from those troubled times of the school. And then we're going. Let's talk about the acting side of it. Let's lead into that. So what drove you towards the arts?
So now we're in my early 20s. In my teenage years, actually, let's tie this together. So here are the things that began making a big difference in my life. One, I began walking long distances just to clear my mind and to think. So from around 14, 15, I began walking for hours on end. And that began stripping the fat out of my body. The other thing is I discovered that I wanted to be a musician. And I became a bass player. So I began getting involved in the local music scene. And the thing about being a bass player is not many people are bass players. Everybody's a guitar player or a singer.
In fairness, the majority of people that I have had on this podcast are bass players.
Hilarious.
Which is great. Well, yeah. David Pistorius, he's a bass player. Nick's Grace, as far as I know, he is a bass player, from what I remember. Nick, if you're listening, I do apologise if I got your instrument wrong.
Now these guys
I do know a lot of bass players and
bass players or failed guitar players. I have to ask that question because there's definitely a mentality difference between some guy who just couldn't hack it as a guitar player, so figured they could keep the rhythm, versus somebody who loves the instrument and is fundamentally a bass player.
What about a guy who started out with bass but then went on to actual guitar?
Are they still a bass player?
They can still play the bass. They actually played bass on my Flower Scotland cover album that I used to raise money for mental health.
Oh, cool.
And they jumped in for the bass player who ironically couldn't make it that day. Did the rehearsal just on the fly. Who hadn't picked up a bass in 2 or 3 years. And I said, "You're performing on the track, buddy." So, yeah. So I would say it was about maybe a 90-10 split. The majority are the bass was their instrument, and the other kind of ones where they just kind of mix about. But yeah, so there you go. We are representing the bass players on that Mental Ginger show. Fight the power.
Boom, boom. But through the bass, I began having social credibility because there weren't that many bass players around Philadelphia. So I was in 50 bands. I only knew about 2 of them, but I was in 50 bands. I was everybody's bass player.
Nice.
Through the bass, I began meeting people through my band back then. I began, passing out demos and talking to people and playing some shows. But we were a weird band. We weren't, most people were into sort of like party metal, and we were not that at all.
But
I had to do it all over.
For any youngsters that are listening, what Bruce is describing is how networking happened before social media.
Mm-hmm.
They would actually have a CD or a cassette. They would give them it, and they would exchange in person, and they move on. Simple.
All these things happened at malls, at movie theaters, or at fast food restaurants. That's where people used to gather.
Yep. Simpler times, better times.
Simpler times. So I was really invested in my music, but my guitar player, who was one of my close friends, he was going for an engineering degree, and he lost his passion for music, and he went away. And I just couldn't find somebody to replace him, because in this city full of people who are either interested in power metal, thrash, or glam metal, I was doing weird alternative hardcore stuff. It still fell into the metal genre.
Yeah.
But my music was completely out of the realm of everybody else. So I couldn't find somebody to replace them. And eventually I sort of stopped. And then here I am, this artistic person, and I have no direction. I'm working as a computer technician for this one guy at his private company. So I have money, but I don't have something going on.
Yeah.
So I decided to I'd gotten my GED, having left school in the middle of 7th grade. I got my GED. So I was
Good on you.
I was effectively able to apply to go to college, and I went to a community college just to find something. And I tried to get involved in the fine woodworking program just to be crafty because I like doing things with my hands, thus the models.
Exactly.
But it turns out I was really, really allergic to a lot of wood, and being around a ton of dust was really bad.
Oh dear.
I was like, oh crap, I need to do something else. So I shifted majors into the communication track and decided, because I was still cripplingly shy, I could go around, but I still wasn't like effulsive, and I wasn't out there. When people meet me and I can talk to people and I pull people in, and it's like, oh my God, he is so extroverted. And technically, I guess that's true. I am, but that is a learned behavior. I was not naturally extroverted. I had to learn to be it. My brother, he was the kind of person whom, if you left him naked in a desert, he'd be back at your doorstep. This is what my mom used to say. He'd be back at your doorstep with a caravan behind him. He could charm anybody. He was this bright, personable thing. My mom had this like big, larger than life personality. And then there was me. No, for the people on just Spotify, I just like demurely looked down and looked around. I was cripplingly shy. I wanted to talk to girls. I wanted to have, and it turns out from a friend who later detailed every girl who actually liked me that I couldn't look in the eye and talk to. All the missed opportunities of my teenage years to my early 20s, because, and this was his moment to be able to lecture me. So it was a shining moment for him. But there were a ton of people who really liked me that I assumed wouldn't have any interest in me. So I effectively came off as asexual. I was, before nice guy became a horrible pejorative, I was that nice guy that, oh, he's so sweet. I was, but they didn't see me as somebody who would be sexually viable. And that was my fault, because for given value of the word my fault, I put off an asexual vibe. There was no reason for a girl to take an interest in me, even if they really liked me and would have, because it didn't seem like the sort of thing that I would be interested in.
Wow.
And that didn't change until I was about 21. And I had a buddy named Steve. Now, Steve was tall. He had abs. He was gorgeous. But I would watch Steve as we were hanging out, talk to girls. And Steve could have, or at least at the time I thought this, he could have any girl he wanted. Now, that probably isn't true. But he seemed to. But there was definitely a demarcation line between how successful he was. And I could see it in his attitude. When Steve was on and he was funny, and mostly it's when he was funny, girls gravitated towards him. And then there were times when he was just not feeling well or down on himself, and he couldn't, and it was crickets. Girls would not look at him. And I realized, oh crap, it's not how I look, because due to being picked on when I was 11 years old, there's that voice that goes, you are a hideous beast. You are ugly. Don't look anyone in the eye. It's totally not true.
Yep.
But that goes back to the 280-pound 11-year-old. That 280-pound 11-year-old also believes that I'm probably on an attractive level of Quasimodo. Logically, I know this is not the case. Even now, being heavier than I was, I've got a nice jawline. I know from my own online dating that I am at least above the 50 percentile in attractiveness, probably above the 70 percentile. I'm going the wrong direction. 30 percentile.
No, in fairness, Bruce, I was going to say, you are a handsome man. You are.
You slut.
Hey, gingers are natural sluts.
and it's
I've,
one of
I've
the things I
already
admire about them.
I've already proposed to about 4 different people that have came on this show. Well, my wife is going to be so pissed when she finds out that we're turning Mormon.
And
So
also, you'll need
so
a much bigger bed.
I can sleep on a couch. It's fine. I'm all right with that. I'll probably sleep on the couch tonight. In fairness,
Once she hears
But-
this, definitely so.
oh,
But
she
yeah,
doesn't.
so
She doesn't listen. She has no faith in me. It's brilliant.
that's wonderful.
Yeah,
What?
love her dearly, but yeah. So, well, because we are
So
starting to come up on a bit of time, I want to hear more about what. You started finding yourself like kind of through
Right.
doing your creative
So,
aspects.
so acting was an
Mhm.
attempt to break the shyness. Acting
Yeah.
was an attempt to put me in a situation or to give me the tools so that I can learn to talk to people. And it did that. It mostly did that through one play. I did this play called Zoo Story. It was my first
Ah.
lead. And almost all the dialogue, it was a 2-person play, but almost all the dialogue came out of my mouth. And it was all highly embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I delivered this to an auditorium full of people. And after that, it was sort of like, well, crap, I just did that. Talking to 3 people at a party is no problem. And I began refining my ability to talk to people. Humor is one of the best social lubrications. It's even better than alcohol. If you can get somebody to laugh,
I'll use that to have my non-alcoholic beverage just now.
my water so that I don't make too much mouth noise.
Yep. This is actually the first time I've ever had that like any type of beverage on screen. So this is a first.
I'm glad I could bring that first to you.
Mm.
Once again, my beverage.
Yes.
Hiding the label? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Besides, you can't get that.
I'm just like pointing out so the barcode's facing this way, no one can see it. But yeah, this is you have broken my drinking on podcast virginity. Thank you.
Mm. For back to the whole shyness, as I
Mhm.
began acting and doing performance and working on the idea of bringing humor, it helped. Then my first, to skip forward, I had being the very, very kind of shy person, my first long-term relationship went over 8 years. It was my first legitimate girlfriend. It was some girl that I had known like when I was 14 or 15.
Mhm.
I never thought she'd be interested in me. I didn't think I was interested in her. And one night it went from like 0 to 100. And
Wow.
we began this relationship. The relationship should have lasted 6 months at most.
Mm.
It went for 8 years, and it was not a good one. I don't want to go into too much detail about that because there's much more important things to get to.
I'll tell you what, because I'm probably going to have you back on for another one if you're willing to come back on.
Sure.
That'll be part of the sequel.
Cool.
Because trust me, I've got a list of abusive relationships up to yin yang. We could definitely have a good confab about that. So we skip past the 8 years of we'll say 7.5 years of hell because you said that she lasted 6 months. So we skip past that. Hopefully you're on a better footing. And we're
right now I couldn't be on a better footing right now than if I've met. I don't want to say that I don't believe in soulmates because the world is full of people, and there are people that you are physiologically and psychologically and emotionally suited towards, and there's more than one of them. I found one of them. It is an achievement. The girl I am dating now, who may or may not listen to this, but if she did at this point, she'd be like, stop talking about me. My delightfully media shy girlfriend, Liz, who is nothing but supportive, nothing but loving, a great pet mom to all of our animals.
just a great person.
Just a great person. And not only do I love her, I particularly like her. And I think that in some ways is almost as, if not more important, is the fact that I truly enjoy being around her. I just like her as a person.
Yeah, definitely, man.
But that's for dating stories at a later point.
Yeah, that's for the sequel. But I'm really glad that you've managed to find that person. Well, it can be rough to find them, and I'm really happy that you've done that. Well done, man.
You have to give yourself. Well, let's not get into the dating philosophy. Let's get back. So 8 years, that went down the tubes. I wanted to move out to Los Angeles to pursue acting and all these different things because I had met somebody who was this beautiful, talented, amazing actress who lived in Los Angeles and got no traction whatsoever. And it's not because she couldn't have. She didn't try at all. So I became very aware that a lot of people in their lives don't accomplish anything because they never actually make the effort to do it. And there's various reasons, but mostly you can live with the dream, but when you try, you either have succeeded or failed. So the question of whether could you have gets answered. I didn't want to live my life like that. And I wasn't enjoying being in Philadelphia for the most part. So I moved out to Los Angeles and began trying to build a life here and fell into IT, where I basically was a freelance computer technician where I would had to deal with people while their businesses were collapsing around them and save them from that. And what I found is that using humor would help mitigate the situation. I could calm them. I could make them comforted. So I really began practicing humor with that. And of course, various acting classes and improv classes. And I think naturally, even as a kid, probably I had this sense of humor to begin with. It wasn't something I had to create out of whole cloth. But I began, and also working as a freelance technician, I began developing skills that you don't normally develop, such as being able to ask for what you're worth. So it's very hard to get me to do something I don't want to do unless there's quite a bit of money involved, because just an opportunity or the experience isn't enough for me. I know my value, and it's important to know your value. So I don't have a problem asking for my value. So I tend to either do things for free or I do things for a lot of money. But I'm not, beer money doesn't interest me. One, I don't drink beer, but I would rather have an exchange of skills than take $20 off you, because if you can only pay me $20, you probably need that 20 a lot more than I do.
So we'll jump to the podcast. So the fittest fat kid you know. So
that's who I am.
We've probably had we've got the gist of the title. So tell us a bit about the show. I mean, I listened to it, but I'm not going to spoiler alert it. What I'm going to do is sell, baby. Sell.
Please, sell. You got to sell, otherwise the match gets boring. So the fittest fat kid, was born out of what has been my up and down weight loss journey. At this point, it's probably more like 6 years ago, my weight started spiking because I was working an IT job that involved me dealing with somebody who was a great person. He was nice, but our work styles clashed. And so it was highly, highly frustrating for me. And I am a professionally trained comfort eater. There are people who are better at it than me, but not me. So I've always had this up and down with my fitness. I've always tried to get into a shape that wasn't affected by the medicine that I was on. And I had been doing well prior to about 2015, but then my weight began spiking, and it spiked. It went up 90 pounds.
Wow.
Maybe 100 pounds. It's hard to say. I only know that by the time I weighed myself, when I drew my line in the sand, it was at 270.
Wow.
I began losing the weight, and how I started, I was trying to do this web series. Well, I'd made this short film called Dark Spectre, and then I made a sequel called Dark Spectre 2, and I shot that in 2016. And at first it was just more of the same, except it got a lot more serious. Then I wanted to make it into a series. So in getting back into fitness, how I decided to do it, it was like, I want to learn stunts. So at 270 pounds, I went to a sword and fighting class to learn how to do. I didn't really care about the swords, because what I was learning it for was for Dark Spectre. And the Dark Spectre didn't use swords or weapons. He used his fists, and he threw fireballs. So that's VFX, and that's fists. And I'm very particular about my Kung Fu and my action films. I like good action. I don't like fast cuts where you can't follow the action.
Yeah.
I want to see a fist cross face, and I want to believe that the person who threw the fist and who got hit were the same. These were the people who did it were the same. So I wanted to have enough skills. Now, a good stunt coordinator is not going to let an actor do this, but the more you can do, the more they can utilize the footage. So it's very clear, so that it's not as clear that somebody else stepped in for you.
Yeah.
Like Charlie Cox with Daredevil. That guy does a lot of his own fighting, and
Definitely.
it looks it.
It's fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think of all of the MCU people, his fights on the Daredevil show were some of the best.
Yeah, and the fact they were inspired by like some of the the Japanese like old boy one takes, or they were you just look at some of the shots from there and you're like,
That
wow.
the one where they hide the takes in, they've crossed the hall, so now they can do another take. It's amazing stuff. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to do. So I began getting involved in stunt classes. The first place I went to, they were really good at what they did, but a lot of what they did was sword play and stuff that could be useful, but wasn't what I was looking for. So I then found myself to another place, which was called XMA. And XMA took place at this celebrity gym with a guy named, he wasn't part of XMA, but his name was Eric the Trainer. It was his gym. And the stunt class took place in the boxing area there. I began working out with XMA, but when the shift of XMA went to kind of tailoring towards some kind of online forum, and the classes got really slow. And I don't have an attention span to go back to a lower level. I need to be constantly moving, and that's what part of my exercise. And one of the things coming up is me talking to my workout buddy Scott. That'll be not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday on my podcast.
Don't worry,
we talk about
by the time this airs, we'll be in 2022, so you'll be further down the road with that.
Months prior to months prior to this, the episode where me and Scott talk about kind of my drive. Because even when I'm heavy, if I'm working out, I work out at a high level. And I need to, because otherwise I get bored and I want to move on. I had to move on from XMA. I ended up getting a trainer at this gym. And I also found my rhythm to lose weight, and my weight plummeted. So I went from 270 to 180.
Brilliant.
Then the pandemic hit, and my performance thing died on the vine. Because I wasn't forward enough that my stuff had momentum and my name had momentum, separate of me constantly pushing.
Yeah.
So when everything shut down, everything of mine died on the vine. My IT work, what was left of it, because I was phasing out of IT, but that went away.
Yeah.
Everything stopped. We had a horrible house guest who was a relative. The house I live in was originally owned by two brothers, my girlfriend's father and his brother. So his brother's daughter just decided to move herself in and do things like have alcoholic ragers and smoke in the house and fight with us all the time. And she would try to dominate me. Jeez. Like, for example, this area that I'm in is my computer area, my work area. And Liz's father gave me the permission when we moved in because they needed us here to take care of the house. And eventually now the idea is for this house to become ours. But I've got a computer that, because of my compressor you can't hear, the computer weighs 100 pounds.
Wow. It
is not a server, but it is a high performance computer. It is a massive tower. I have numerous hard drives in it. It's intense. It's also, again, I can't emphasize this enough, 100 pounds. You can't see them, but there are two monitors, both of which are massive. I've got these monitor speakers. My setup weighs 150 pounds. When she moved in, you can see the nice little outside window right there.
Yeah.
But there are all these big windows, and there's a nice yard, and there's a nice view of Los Angeles. Within a week of her moving in, she had sat down at my computer desk and she was working on her laptop. And me and this girl never got along because she always treated my girlfriend like shit and was even worse to me. I knew we were going to fight over this desk because I needed to work that day. So when I came to approach her, I was like, hey, I need to sit down. She was like, okay, got up. And I was like, oh my God, we're not going to fight. She then turns around. She was like, by the way, you probably want to move your computer. There literally is nowhere else in this house for this computer to go.
Yeah.
There's no other room for it. And this became the first blow up. So I don't want to get into too much detail. I've gotten into far more detail on this than I should because it is a bit of a private thing with other people involved. But ultimately, this situation created the need for Liz's father to finally buy out the house so that he's the sole owner, and she had to go. But this created a lot of psychological scarring for both myself and for Liz. And that was in 2020. So my weight began going up because the gym I went to shut down. My workout buddy, we weren't seeing each other. I was having this terrible time that was accelerating in a nasty way that made me worried for my safety, because certainly can't defend myself. Finally, she's gone. Once all that happened, and that happened in the later part of 2020, around November, I began having a return of a childhood illness that was hives. So all over my arms, face, my body, I was all broken out and constantly itchy. So think about this. Think about if you've ever had chicken pox, or if you've ever been hit by poison ivy.
I've had hives.
So you know how terrible they can be.
Yes.
Now picture having them for 9 months straight.
Oh, man.
My weight exploded from November to January, from about 190 to about 205. And then from January to August to 258.
Wow.
So here I am. And I figured out with the hives, it seems to be mostly dairy, even though there are other factors. When I do keto, even if I do have dairy, I might have light breakout, but it's not a crippling thing. So here we are at August, September. I have not reached out to people because I don't want people to see me. I don't want people to hear me. I don't want to be seen. I get a phone call, and it's Eric the trainer. Hey man, I've been thinking about you. And Eric is this impulsive, very extroverted person and very positive. And one of the people who wouldn't waste an opportunity to introduce me to somebody else and just sell the fact that, like, I am brilliant, I am funny, I am warm. I love you, dude. Eric, that's Eric. And he reached out to me, and I haven't heard from you, and I won't call me back. So now I can't avoid Eric. I call him up, and I just immediately start crying on the phone with him. I'm so sorry. And I told him why he hasn't heard from me, and I'm embarrassed. And even now, I wouldn't even call you had you not called me. And he was like, I want you to come to the gym tomorrow. Come to the gym tomorrow. Just come to the gym tomorrow. So I go to the gym, and he's like, dude, it's not as bad as you think. We've worked through this before. This is fine. And I go through a workout with him, and then and I see my trainer, who's a guy named Miles, and I sit there and talk to Miles. It's like, look, man, I just don't, with the business and everything shut down, I was like, we just don't have the money. I can't come train. And it was like, well, maybe you can do something to help get you the money. Maybe like a show or a podcast. Ding. So I think about it for a week. I record my trailer the next week. And then my first episode is the following week. So that was 9 to 10 weeks ago.
Brilliant, man.
And the idea of the podcast is, on the one hand, to hold me personally accountable, because I'm now talking about all these things. So whether it's good or it's bad, like last week was Thanksgiving. Everything went off the rails. Then on top of that, prior to the Thanksgiving itself, one of my dogs, Daisy, who was 12 years old, she's this Bichon. My dogs are effectively my children. I know some people who have children get offended at that, but I don't care.
I've got kids, and I've got a cat. Trust me, the fur baby. You got to look after the fur baby.
Yes, they are obligations. They are these creatures that do nothing but love me.
I got given a bit of advice, and it was dogs prepare you for kids, cats prepare you for teenagers. And I said that.
I've never heard that before, but that's
I said that just as you were drinking water. I apologize. But yeah, that's what I got told, and I was like, okay, so I'm going to be okay when the boys turn into teenagers, because I'm okay with my cat. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm guessing.
So she had pneumonia. She had pneumonia 2 Sundays ago, and for the first time in my life. Now Daisy's had a rough year to begin with. She's had back surgery because she has 7 slip discs, as it turned out, and one we didn't know that, and then an 8th happened, and she lost the use of her back legs. It's 95% back after surgery. She's her normal, playful self, but then pneumonia. And so for the first time in my entire 12 years with her, I was worried she wouldn't make it. So that was 4 days in emergency vet, and I went off diet. I had weathered a bunch of stuff prior to that, but I went off my diet and then Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So, and at 1:00 today, I'm meeting a buddy for sushi, which
Mm.
means I have an hour.
Well, in
And I can
fairness,
fill that hour too.
I know. In fairness, my kids are just about getting ready to bed. We're recording this podcast, and I've seen my wife coming in a couple of times, and I've seen her look over like, "If you don't finish and help me with these kids to get ready for bed, which is your job, I'm going to kill you."
Yes.
What? So
that's
why I'm like subtly going, "Come on, buddy." Well, I may die by the end of this episode. We won't get to a 33rd or 34th episode here. So.
Oh God, I can talk.
But I do love the premise of your podcast. I do listen to it, and I love how honest you are about your journey, and how you're holding yourself accountable to it. And it's really refreshing to have something like that. So tell the audience where the rest of them can find you. I know they can find you on YouTube. Where are the other places that we can go? What dates? What times? Sell it.
All right, so I am the fittest fat kid you know, and my socials, where you can find me at Twitter at Fittest Fat Kid, Instagram at Fittest Fat Kid, TikTok at Fittest Fat Kid. You might have discovered there is a pattern here.
I'm sensing a rhythm. Yes.
Fittest Fat Kid. If you're somebody out in this, if you're one of the 7 or 8 people listening to this, and you're having a weight loss struggle and journey, and you don't know who to talk to, you need advice, you can email me at hi@fittestfatkid.com. And I answer my emails, I interact, I try to help. The entire point of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to talk open and honestly about the feelings that I go through and show that you don't have to be damaged by them or morose or view them as tragedies. They're not good, and we know they're not good. But that's not the important thing. To know that other people are going through the same thing you're going through, we can help each other get through them. Nothing that I'm going through, nothing that you might be going through is unique to the individual. It's the human condition. And just know that no matter how blocked up you might feel right now, somebody else has been that blocked up before and they've managed to get through it. And the way you get through it is to figure out what works for you by experimentation and by understanding that it's not going to be a smooth road. Only Instagram models have smooth roads, and they didn't. They're just presenting it to you that way.
That's why we have filters.
Yep. That's why there's filters. That's why there's selective presentation. But I want to present the raw honesty of it, and also show that no matter how bad it might get, if you don't give into the despair, you can always build back.
Yeah. And it's like I said, your podcast is absolutely brilliant because it's raw, it's honest. You engage with people who want to engage with you, and you do feel like you're on a journey with you through the podcast, and that's what the best podcasts do, and yours is definitely one of them, man. Bruce, I wish you nothing but success with it. You're doing so well, and I'm rooting for you, buddy. I really am.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I know because of my ability to just keep talking, I know we didn't quite get to everything you wanted to get.
It's all right, but because of my ability to keep listening, I've really enjoyed listening to you. Well, trust me, if my wife hadn't given me a couple of death glares, we'd be talking for that extra hour. But we can save this for the sequel, possibly a trilogy. You are a man of fellow trilogies like myself. So this could be a thing. So I will ask you the one piece of advice that you could give somebody that's struggling with mental health issues at this point. What would that piece of advice be, and why?
When you are struggling with mental issues, oftentimes there is a instinct, a need to self-isolate, to cut yourself off from others. It is the most detrimental thing you can do, in my opinion. When you are feeling sad, down, depressed, getting out among people, going out to experience something. It doesn't matter what the something is. Being active. And I'm not talking about going and working out. Going to, I don't know if there's an equivalent in other countries, but Dave and Buster's, where there's video games and skee ball and stuff like that. Go out and do that. Go shoot pool. Go bowling. Go walk in the park, go to a batting cage, go to find a meetup where there's a dodgeball league. It doesn't matter what the it is. The important thing is just simply doing the it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're beginning to cave in on yourself, and even if you feel like you don't have the energy, if you can just force yourself out there, it can provide sunlight and it can provide connection, even if it's a very superficial connection. But as you're closing in on yourself, it's giving you the space to go into the dark place. Don't give yourself the space.
Definitely, man. That's fantastic piece of advice, Bruce. I'm really, really glad to have had you on the podcast. And we'll round off with Los Angeles' favourite segment, Ask Andrew Anything. Now, for my regular listeners, this is when, after me grilling my guest for 1 hour, 25 minutes and 22 seconds, this is where we get to turn it around and the guest gets to ask me a question. It could go very well. It could go very badly. But that's all part of the fun. So, Bruce, do you have a question for this mental ginger?
Yes, I do.
Yes, fire away.
Yes, I do. The mental ginger is very much like the fittest fat kid you know, and it's that you working through various issues you might have and trying to find that balance in life through use of public recrimination, maybe? No, but through this public forum.
I do like the public recrimination analogy, though. I might steal that.
Feel free. I know where you live. Across the pond. Do you feel that the podcast has indeed helped you with this? And if so, in what way?
Yes, it definitely has helped me. Well, I've felt that I've become more confident, not only as like a host, but as a person. Having that interaction, whether it be over Zoom or when I've been having people in the studio and having the face-to-face connection as well, what has helped me improve my mental health. It's given me a bit of that piece of my life back, that when you have kids, you always feel like you lose that part of yourself that you had before it, like the independent part of you. You're not Andrew and Alison anymore, you're mum and dad. And you're reliant on these two, well, in my case, the two little beings that need you for everything. Now that they're up a little bit, now that they're 3, they still need you, but they don't need you as much. So you can get a bit of your own self back. And don't get me wrong, it would have happened a year sooner, but the pandemic kind of screwed us. But that's why I thought I need to do something like the podcast. I need to get my health back and back on track. And then I took not well, which was an absolute nightmare, and being removed from my kids, which was something I never hide away from, but it still feels horrible every time you say it. But it helped me kind of recalibrate and fight back, and prove that I was worth something, and there was people that needed me. My boys needed me, my wife needed me, and I just focused on them. And then once I got to that point, I thought, right, I'm going to go back to the podcast, but I want to redefine it to the things that I know and that I want to help with. And I'm passionate about the arts. I love helping people who are really trying in the arts get recognised and get their attention and the things that they deserve. And I'm passionate about mental health. I've done a few projects try and raise awareness. We're getting better with the stigma, but it's still there, and I want to make sure it's stamped out completely. And if there's anything that I can do to try and combine these two and help make a difference to the people out there, it's worth it. But for the purely selfish part of me, it's really helping me. I come off these things and I feel better. It's like when I used to go on stage, I'd feel like that kind of rush of positive adrenaline. It's the same when I'm doing a podcast. I come off and I want to tell my wife about it. Granted, most of the time she's in bed by that point, so I have to wait and tell her the next day. But I want to tell people about it and getting to see how it's been building up. Like the subscribers have been going up, the listeners have been going up, and it's so refreshing. It's the first time that I've ever really backed myself and said, I'm going to do something that's going to be a success. People are going to come on, people are going to love it, people are going to want to listen to it, and I will make this a success. You mark my words. And I did put that in a post because I was so confident. And I'd never had the confidence like that to say, I am going to be a success at something. And it's backing up. What the numbers are coming up, the people are listening, the people are wanting to come on, the people actually come off and say, right, I want to come back on. So it's proof I'm doing something.
You're very
right.
easy to talk to. I will say you were very easy to talk to. You had very good hosting instincts. I definitely appreciated your abilities here.
Oh.
I do have a follow-up question for you.
Fire away. I always love an Ask Andrew follow-up.
How? So this has helped grow your confidence. This is something that you are taking pride in. This is giving you a different venue to work. Not that you're working on social skills, but clearly you can't do interviews without it affecting your social skills.
Yeah.
Has it translated into the real world in your interactions with strangers and acquaintances and people you might meet on the street?
With people on the street, not so much. Well, because I'm always wary of like strangers until I can feel like I can kind of build that little bit in myself to go near someone. With relationships that like my wife, what I certainly feel like I've got built up a more open with her, because I didn't realize that I was as closed off until I started doing the work on myself. I'm much more open with my kids. Like well, I was always very emotionally available and telling them I love them and I'll be there for them. But now I'm more open in the case of if I have a bad day, which I do, and sometimes people get in the firing line, kids in particular, because I'm around them most of the time. I'll go up to them afterwards and I'll say, I'm really sorry, Kieran, or I'm really sorry, Connor. Daddy was really struggling, today. You know what, Daddy, has a bit of problems, trying to keep himself together. But I'm going to work on it, and we're going to work through it, and I will be better. And I never would have done that. I would have never shown that vulnerability around my kids before because I got told you have to be the strong one. No, you don't. Parents are human. They're going to make mistakes. That's what happens.
And the more
I would much
and
rather.
the more you normalize that for your kids, the better off it is. That's
exactly. I would much
massive
rather.
Societal problems is that toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I would much rather like my dad say to me that he's struggling with something, than him trying to say I'm okay and carry on, and then all of a sudden it just blows up from out of nowhere. And that's what, and I was like, I don't want to be like that with my kids. If I do blow up, I want to take time to calm down afterwards, go up to them and say, Daddy's had a bit of a bad one. I'm really sorry. It wasn't your fault, but I will be better next time. And it's also helped with like being out, speaking to my friends as well. They've noticed that I'm more confident. They've noticed that I've got my smile back when I'm talking, and that my cheeky humours came back as well, like my inappropriate jokes and things like that. And on the podcast, I feel more confident because as the episodes go on, I'm letting my guard down. I can be a bit more sweary. I can be a bit more jokey. I mean, it's not often that I would walk up to somebody because this is essentially like meeting somebody for the first time. And I normally wouldn't go up to somebody for the first time if they said, "Oh, I've got 5 kids," and I would go, "Did your dad not teach you to pull out?" Normally people don't do that, but I've gained that confidence that I can just be like, this is the style of humour that I've got. None of it's meant to be offensive, because we're just having a conversation. And I hope that you have as much fun bouncing off of me as I do with you. And it's great, and I love it, and I'm noticing it in the real world. Don't get me wrong, my day job still blows, but it's one of those ones where I got to do it to get the pay, so my kids can have the life I feel they deserve. And then when this finally gets to where I wanted to be, I can be like, right, guys, bye. But I'm upfront with them about that. The day job know that. That's why they say to me, you don't have any career prospects here. I'm like, that's fine, because this isn't the career I want. I'm here to pay the bills. And then, once I get where I want to go, I'm gone. So, it's certainly helped. Sometimes maybe being a bit too honest has been to my detriment, but I find it more of a positive. But Bruce, thank you.
I'm like that too.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't realise that the filter has to come off until after I've said it, and I go, difference is at least I acknowledge it afterwards and do apologise. But Bruce, I've really, really had a great time speaking to you. You've got to get back on for a sequel. Let me know. Obviously, I'll be keeping updated with how your podcast is going for the listeners. Once again,
Awesome.
The Fittest Fat Kid, you can find him on all of the socials, on YouTube as well. Please check it out. It's absolutely brilliant. So until next time, my 7 faithful followers, I've been Andrew Durning. This has been Bruce Nachsin.
He's got it. He got it.
Yes, I almost fell at the final hurdle, but I just only clipped it slightly. Got it.
7 listeners. Have a good rest of your whatever it is at this point of the year.
Yep. Enjoy whatever device you're listening on. Go have a great day. And until next time, take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.